Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Stick around to find out how you can get a 14-day free trial. Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today, we're getting a little bit steamy as I'm responding to a video on the What Would You Say channel that tries to make the case that watching pornography is always bad, especially for relationships. And while there can certainly be valid reasons to object to porn, the religious reasoning always wants it to be more of a black and white issue than it is, so they end up having to distort or even outright lie about the data in order to get to the conclusions that they want. So don't think of this video as a response video, think of it more as an examination of the data surrounding pornography while using the original video as a conversation starter. So let's take a look. But first, a word from our sponsor, Aura. Do you know how much of your personal data is up for sale on the internet by data brokers? Yes, even you, Puddles. Even the most careful of internet users, like Puddles here, can end up with their personal information being passed between data brokers. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email address, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. And that's a problem that Aura, the sponsor of today's video, has set out to solve. Aura shows you which data brokers are selling your information and automatically submits opt-out requests for you. Cleaning up your information not only helps reduce the amount of spam you get, but can also help protect you from hackers who could use this information to access your social media accounts, bank accounts, or other sensitive data. Aura also does so much more to protect you and your family from online threats that you may not be able to see. With Aura, you'll also be able to access features like antivirus, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without having to download several different apps. It's really easy to set up, and best of all, you get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one or two of these tools, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping you safe so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy, and I value yours. And yours. You can go to aura.com/ViceRhino to start your 2-week free trial. Stop data brokers from exposing your personal information by going to aura.com/ViceRhino to get a 14-day free trial and see how much of yours is being sold. That's www.aura.com/ViceRhino for your 14-day free trial. And as a nice little bonus, it's Puddles approved. She showed up for this right out of nowhere. That was not scripted.
You're in a conversation about pornography, and someone says, porn isn't a problem for relationships, it can even be helpful. What would you say?
I love how all of the What Would You Say videos start with the assumption that you're just in a casual conversation about this subject that almost nobody has casual conversations about. It's like when my cell phone company had me fill out a survey and asked how likely was I to recommend them to a friend. And I get that the scenario they're thinking of is one where the friend might be looking to switch providers with you giving your opinion, but for 99.99999 etc% of the conversations in my life, I am 0% likely to recommend any mundane product or service to anyone. Same goes for porn. For the vast, vast majority of the conversations in my life, porn never comes up. The only time it ever does, apart from conversations with my partner, is when religious people bring it up and try to talk about how bad it is. So if you're in a conversation about pornography, it's likely one that has been instigated by someone who wants to convince you that it's bad. This is yet another moment where Christians could avoid awkward situations by simply minding their own business.
Some people claim that porn is not only harmless, but may even improve intimacy for couples.
This is true. Though I will say this now to get it out of the way, scientific research about pornography is nearly as problematic as apologists think pornography itself is. Most research about porn starts with the assumption of harm. That is, that there are negative effects to be found. So then it finds those effects, and then through the methodologies that show those negative effects, completely misses out on the positive. But when researchers begin without the assumption of negative effects, instead just searching for any effects, then not only do we still find some of the negative effects, but we begin to find positive ones as well. And for couples, some of the positive effects are things like better sexual communication, an increase in the frequency and quality of sex, and increased feelings of intimacy with real partners.
But is this true? No.
I could accept no as an answer here, but only if you put a bunch of caveats in about things like frequency of use, whether it's used solo or in tandem with partners, whether it's kept a secret, and several more potential factors. But like I said, they want it to be black and white, when in reality it's a gradient with a bunch of shades of gray in the middle.
And here are 3 reasons why. First, porn harms sexual satisfaction. A 2018 study of 1,500 young adults found that more frequent porn viewing was associated with lower rates of sexual satisfaction.
It'd be nice if they actually cited their sources so I didn't have to guess whether or not I found it based on the hints that they've left, but I think I did find the study that they're talking about. But I also kind of understand why they don't want you finding it easily. This study probably doesn't say exactly what they need it to in order to make their point.
Not only are people who use porn generally less satisfied, their levels of dissatisfaction increase with their level of porn use. The more porn someone watches, the more dissatisfied they generally are.
Yeah, so there's a couple things to bring up here. First, the paper that you guys cited, or rather failed to cite, found a curvilinear relationship, not a linear one, meaning that the effects are negligible at first, but increase exponentially as porn use increases. Second, given the nature of the data that this paper was relying on, they cannot demonstrate a causal link. That is, they can't say that more porn use causes you to be less satisfied in your sex life. In fact, it's not only possible, but entirely plausible that the relationship could be reversed here. Being dissatisfied in your sex life causes you to use more porn, rather than being the other way around. The best they can do when it comes to suggesting that the causation starts with porn is to point out that studies with different methodologies have found similar correlations, saying, this methodological triangulation suggests that pornography does have at least a partial causal effect on some persons' reduced sexual satisfaction. The precise form of the relationship, however, is not fully understood. Studies have assumed, and often found, a negative linear association. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement of the idea that porn causes dissatisfaction. This study also was not specifically about the impact of porn on relationships. They did, however, compare people in relationships with those who are single to see what the difference might be. And lo and behold, the negative association between sexual satisfaction and porn use was significantly lower among people in relationships. Now, just as we can't assume that porn use causes dissatisfaction, we also can't assume from this that being in a relationship somehow protects you from the potential that porn causes dissatisfaction. After all, someone who is in a stable relationship where sex is regularly available is just generally more likely to be sexually satisfied than someone who is single. So that likely accounts for the difference here. But this just further serves to emphasize how important it is to keep in mind the fact that the arrow of causality for stuff like this can be difficult, if not impossible, to parse out. And on top of all these problems with the study, we also find that when you actually ask people that are in relationships open-ended questions about pornography use, and allow them to fully articulate their feelings about how it does or does not impact the relationships, the vast majority of people describe it as having no negative impact, with the majority of the remaining people saying it has a positive impact, with one of the most common positive impacts being that it contributes to communication and sexual self-disclosure, which contributes not only to sexual satisfaction, but with satisfaction with the relationship as a whole. And of course, this research is limited as well. Although a sample size of 430 is nothing to shake a stick at, there are limitations inherent to the open-ended bottom-up approach that they took. But if nothing else, their study casts doubt on the common belief that pornography is just unequivocally bad for relationships and provides a new direction with potential new focuses for future close-ended research. If the survey asking people about the impact of porn on their relationship neglect to even ask about the potential benefits that this study found, then they just aren't going to find any of those benefits in their data. Not because they're not there, but because they didn't look.
Also, the same study found no evidence at all that porn led to greater sexual satisfaction for anyone.
Again, true, but the sentence in the paper that explicitly states that comes immediately before the part that says, and I quote, "These results should be interpreted through the lens of several study limitations. First, it must be remembered that correlation does not prove causation, and the results were correlational only. Second, the generalizability of the results are limited, as the sample was one of convenience and comprised mostly of college students. Third, the cross-sectional nature of the results precluded a test of reciprocal relationships between pornography consumption and sexual satisfaction." And then continues on to describe even more limitations. So yeah, they might not have found a positive benefit, but that's just a sentence away from where they tell you in no uncertain terms that this is purely correlational and that correlation does not prove causation, followed by them outlining several potential scenarios where the causal link could be the other way around. Also worth mentioning is that they are emphasizing that it did not find any benefits for anyone, but they did comparisons between several different groups, not just those in relationships and those not. And what I find most interesting here is that the decrease in sexual satisfaction seems to have been the most drastic among religious people than any other group. Again, correlation doesn't prove causation here, but if I were to hazard a guess, I'd suggest that that has something to do with all the stigmatization and shame and guilt that religious people foster upon porn use.
Which leads to the second point. Porn creates unrealistic expectations for sex.
It can, yes, but again, this is where it's not a black and white issue. For instance, one of the most popular categories of porn is amateur porn. Stuff made by real people just shooting what they're doing themselves on their phones and whatnot. In one study, it was found that viewing SEIM, sexually explicit internet movies, allowed the women participants to see other women's naked bodies in a context besides popular culture, a form that can create unrealistic self-expectations through its continuous portrayals of cosmetically and digitally altered women. Participants described being more confident about their body image after watching realistic SEIM because they realize their bodies are normal. That was specific to amateur and feminist porn, but even with more mainstream porn, they found that viewing it had a negative impact on body image while young, but upon maturing, enabled the participants to evaluate it with a more critical eye, recognizing even in the unrealistic world of porn that there are a myriad of body types, resulting in an overall positive impact on body image. Honestly, in that study, there's a comparison chart that shows the benefits and challenges associated with porn, and the main challenge that caught my eye was the fact that mostly in young men, there can be feelings of guilt or disgust over the portrayal of women in misogynistic genres, and the fact that that is a negative is very encouraging to me, because I fucking hate how a good chunk of porn treats women, and I would like to see it change for the better, and it seems that I'm not alone among men in this. Anyway, looking at the chart, we see an increase in sexual self-acceptance and self-confidence, improved body image, as a young adult, under 18 saw a decreased confidence in body image, and an increase in satisfaction with sexual abilities, which is almost the exact opposite of unrealistic expectations. Now, among younger youth, there was an increased pressure to meet the sexual expectations of self and others, with an inability to accurately assess realism. Pair that with the decreased confidence in body image among the under 18 group, and what this suggests to me is that discussions of porn should be included in sex education, providing these age groups with the tools that they need in order to avoid these negative effects. Now, I agree that it would be nice to say that just keep porn away from the kids until they're old enough to watch it with a more critical eye would be ideal, but unfortunately the ubiquity of the internet makes that functionally impossible, so it's better to give them the tools to deal with it before they encounter it, rather than leaving them in the dark.
Porn teaches young people what they should expect for themselves and what they should expect from others.
Left to their own devices, yeah, those are the kinds of messages they'll get from it. But if they're educated about it, then when they inevitably come across it, they'll be more equipped to view it in a healthy way, avoiding these unrealistic expectations.
But it's not just young people. Everyone who views porn is exposed to a warped, unrealistic, exaggerated, and unhealthy script about what to expect from sex.
And research has shown that adults are well aware of how unrealistic the portrayals of sex in porn are, and moderate use is unlikely to leave people with the expectation that sex will be like porn, with there actually being a positive effect on expectations, body image, and performance.
Just like photoshopped images of models create standards of beauty that don't exist in real life, porn creates mental images of sex that are fabricated with airbrushes, cameras, lights, stylists, and video editing tools.
The thing is, while Photoshop hasn't been around for all that long, all things considered, supermodels have been a thing for more than a century now. There is nothing new about unrealistic standards of beauty. And yes, being constantly inundated with unrealistic images like that is harmful, but to single out porn when pretty much every mainstream movie is guilty of the exact same thing is to ignore the larger issue. And if anything, this supports the earlier point I made about the appeal and positive benefits of amateur porn.
The result is a fictional view of sex that doesn't actually exist for anyone, anywhere, including the people involved in porn.
Really? I'm not going to happen upon a cute young lady who's stuck with her head in the dryer whose only hope of escape is to be fucked out of it? Huh, I really thought that was in my future.
Which leads to the third point. Porn undermines the stability of relationships.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned from reading all of the studies that I have for this video, it's that this is only true if it's done in secret, in excess, and instead of sex with your partner. Using it in moderation, however, sometimes actually including your partner in the process, it actually seems to improve things quite a bit.
A 2018 study of 2,120 married adults found that those who began using porn after marriage doubled their chances of getting divorced.
And just by using your noggin in conjunction with the stuff that I've already said in this video, I'll bet you guys can figure out what's wrong with that statement. I'll give you a second. Go ahead and give it a quick think. Did you come up with correlation doesn't prove causation? Because again, I'm pretty sure I found the study, and I've read it. And while that was one of the findings, sort of, they misworded it, we'll get to that in a bit, that is also a drastically oversimplified picture. So, for starters, they used data collected in 3 waves of the General Social Survey studies conducted between 2006 and 2014. So that's a longitudinal follow-up survey where the same person would have gone in for 3 separate interviews over the course of the study. There's more to it than that, but that's close enough of an understanding for our purposes here. What the data actually say in this case is that if someone answered no to the question, "Have you seen an X-rated movie in the last year?" in one interview, and then in a subsequent interview answered yes to that same question, they were considered to have started watching porn. And then they looked at how many of those people were married at the time of the survey in which they answered no, and checked to see if they were still married at the time of the survey in which they answered yes. And yes, they did find that people that were married and said no at an earlier point, and said yes at a later point, were about twice as likely to be divorced by the later point than by those who either said yes to both or no to both. And I would agree that there is likely a causal link of some kind here, but I don't think it's anywhere near as straightforward as watching porn makes you more likely to divorce. For starters, they didn't have any way of telling whether porn use began before or after the divorce, so how do you rule out the possibility that divorcing causes porn use rather than it being the other way around? It seems entirely plausible that someone might begin using porn when their real-life sexual partner is no longer around. Also worth mentioning is that doubles your chances of divorce makes it seem way more drastic than it is. In actuality, the control group had about a 6% probability of divorce, the group that started watching porn had about an 11% probability of divorce. But that is far from the only issue here. Remember the question that determined if they began porn use? Have you seen an X-rated movie in the last year? Yeah, so that is an outdated question that could definitely lead to a bunch of false negatives. Only 29.59% of respondents answered yes to that question at any point in the survey, which is odd, given that other survey data suggests that, in a given year, the number of men who view porn at least once is 69%, nice, and the number of women is 40%. Oh, and did I mention that the survey that this study got its numbers from is one where people actually go into a room with a researcher who asks them those questions out loud and writes down their oral responses to the questions? That's another reason why the yes answers could be significantly underrepresented. On top of that, most surveys that ask about porn use ask people to quantify how many times they've used it over the course of the past year. This leads to underreported numbers, as people will be subject not only to misremembering, but social desirability bias, where people tend to make themselves appear more socially acceptable than they actually are, either through self-deception or other deception. Asking how many times have you viewed porn in the last year will yield a smaller number of positive results than just asking about the previous week or month. And since porn use is rather stigmatized, people minimize their number when asking about the year, but if you narrow that down to just asking them the last time they viewed porn, it's only asking about one single instance, so it's less likely to be as affected by that same bias. But that's not all. Back to the doubles the divorce rate study, if we actually assume that there is a direct causal link between starting to use porn and being twice as likely to divorce, then there are some other implications that have to be examined with the study, because they didn't just compare people who began using porn to those who didn't use porn the entire time. They also looked at people who did watch porn the entire time, and people who stopped watching porn. And then they looked at the differences in those numbers by gender. As it turns out, for men, if you began watching porn, you had a 10% probability of divorce compared to men who never watch porn with a 5% probability. For women, they had a 6% probability of divorce if they never watched porn, but a 16% probability of divorce if they started. That is a massive difference. The study authors actually hypothesize that the reason for that is that other studies have found that women who are cheating are more likely to use porn than those who are not, whereas for men, the overall rate stays the same, so beginning porn use for women could be an indication of infidelity, which would also account for the increase in divorces. But that's not the interesting part of this. The next bit is the interesting part. And again, if we're interpreting this in the simplistic way that the video I'm responding to is, the ramifications here are just wild. So when men stopped watching porn in between surveys, their probability of divorce went from 7% to 12%. As in, if a man just watched porn for the entire time period, he was less likely to be divorced at the end of it than a man who stopped partway through. For women, however, if they stopped between surveys, they were only a third as likely to end up divorced as those who did not stop, with 18% of women who had consistent porn use ending up divorced compared to 6% of those who stopped. Now, in line with the author's hypotheses about the relationship between infidelity and porn use for women, if a woman stopped watching porn, there's a decent chance that she also stopped having an affair. So that could account for this discrepancy. But to hell with all this nuance shit. We're just drawing simple causal links here that aren't even warranted. So what this means is that for heterosexual men, if you want your marriage to succeed, you should encourage your bride-to-be to begin watching porn before you get married, and then have her stop shortly after you're married. Also, men should either just consistently watch porn the entire time, or consistently not watch porn, because those two options are fairly close together, and literally any other possibility has a significantly higher chance of divorce. So good news for men, I guess. If you're a guy who watches porn, continuing to watch porn will be better for the chances of your relationship succeeding than if you stop. Either that, or there's some nuance here that isn't quite captured by the sentence, "Those who began using porn after marriage doubled their chances of getting divorced."
Other studies found links between porn use and lower levels of commitment to romantic partners, increased rates of infidelity, and overall harm to the perceived quality of a marriage.
Yeah, that's too vague for me to even begin to know which studies he might be talking about, but the majority of research on this topic hasn't actually looked at couples as a whole. It has mostly just been looking at individuals. But hey, aren't couples made up of individuals? Yes, of course they are, but if you're only ever looking at half of a particular couple, you're never going to get the full picture. There's also the aforementioned problem of closed-ended methodologies that assume harmful effects. To quote the authors of a 2016 study that looked at how actual couples perceive the use of pornography, quote, "From a methodological perspective, investigations assuming that pornography will be harmful to relationships will either confirm negative effects, fail to confirm negative effects, or identify variables that attenuate negative effects, and will tell us little about the occurrence of neutral or positive effects, which may also be experienced. Findings of such investigations, moreover, are at odds with observations reported by persons who live in relationships in which pornography is used, which typically suggests that pornography users and their partners perceive more relationship benefits than harms associated with the use of pornography." So what appears to be the case here is that studies that are looking for negative results will either find those results, find nothing, or find things that mitigate or exacerbate those negative results, while the studies that are more open-ended, not looking for positive or negative results, tend to find mostly neutral results that skew positive.
When our view of what is desirable is defined by something that isn't real, it inevitably leads to disappointment.
If that is the case, it would be the case with all media, not just porn. But also, again, to reiterate, moderate porn use can increase partner intimacy, improve communication, improve sexual confidence, provide a safe method of sexual exploration, relieve stress, and a bunch more. Like, I wouldn't say that you should boycott movies because all the lead Marvel actors are a bunch of hotties and that's unrealistic. Sure, only seeing super sexy people in lead roles can have a negative impact on people, but there are benefits to enjoying a movie that we as a society generally agree outweigh the negatives. Entertainment, stress relief, escapism, bonding through shared experiences, etc. Society trusts that we're not just going to think that our lives should be just like Thor's life because we recognize movies as a pleasant fiction and we watch them for entertainment and sometimes even inspiration. It's the same with porn. They are pleasant fictions that we watch for entertainment, and sometimes even inspiration, with the understanding that that's not what our sex lives should be.
The more we desire things that are unhealthy, the less interest we have in things that are good for us.
I disagree. I desire the very unhealthy potato chips to a degree where, if I don't take steps to stop myself in advance, I will end up eating an entire family-size bag by myself in one sitting. But I still love vegetables like cauliflower and asparagus and feel like I'm missing something when I'm not eating enough of them. Now, that's not to say that porn use cannot rise to an unhealthy level. Even the studies that found positive effects for porn went out of their way to highlight the negative effects of overuse, which are very real. But the fact that something can become unhealthy if used too much is not grounds for cutting that thing out of your life entirely, for the most part. Are there people for whom the best course of action will be to abstain entirely, treating it the same as a recovering alcoholic treats alcohol? Probably. Does porn use actually rise to the same level of addiction as substance use can? Possibly, but the research is divided. An admittedly old study from 2008 that uses quaint terminology like online chat rooms and refers to MySpace as being hypersexual in nature found that only 2% of their 15,000 person sample size reached the threshold for compulsive use. Honestly, with their broad definition of what constituted online sexual activity, I'm legitimately shocked that that number wasn't higher. If you so much as discussed sex in a chat room or a forum, they counted that as time spent in online sexual activity. So like, all of my private chats ever. A more recent study from 2014 reviews the evidence for porn addiction and finds it to be lacking. It seems rather that an appearance of addiction is a function of an interaction in multiple characteristics of a person, such as their religious belief, relationship status, libido, and discrepancy in libido between partners in a relationship, and more. Additionally, they found that only 0.58% of men and 0.43% of women use porn to a degree that would be considered problematic from a clinical perspective. That is, it would actually rise to a level where it interferes with their daily lives. They also point out that, in addition to the myriad of benefits of porn use that I've already discussed here, there appears to be an association with the availability of porn and a decrease in sex offenses, as people who are into things that would be illegal can now see it acted out legally, satiating their desire without acting on it. Regarding social views that might be encouraged by porn, such as the normalization of sexual harassment or holding problematic ideas about gender roles, when controlling for baseline attitudes, viewing porn accounted for less than 1% of the variance. So while it does appear to have an impact, that impact is minuscule. But back to the idea that porn use can rise to the level of addiction, the brain is stimulated in the same way when watching porn as it is when watching emotional movies. So when you see anti-porn organizations warning you about how watching porn affects your brain like a drug, they're not entirely wrong, but neither are they telling the whole story. Their goal with making movies like Fireproof, where Kirk Cameron notoriously smashes a computer in order to avoid looking at porn.
Okay, Lord, no more addictions.
Are to affect your brain in exactly the same way as porn does. But on the flip side, there are also researchers arguing for the addiction model based on neuroimaging data. Though, notably, the conclusion at the end of this particular literature review paper was that, quote, "This review presents strong neuroscientific evidence for viewing internet-related behaviors, including internet pornography use, as potentially addictive." So on the it's not an addiction side, we have data that shows that even if it were an addiction, it impacts a very small percentage of people who actually use it. But the studies that treat it as an addiction often have a selection bias in that they are sampling people who have self-identified as being addicted to porn, skewing their data. On the it is an addiction side, we have the idea that it could potentially be addictive, so it's not like drugs in the sense that exposure actually rewires the brain to create impossible to resist cravings for more. It's more that some people could have a predisposition to becoming addicted, while most people will not become addicted. And notably, this is not a settled issue. Yes, the two papers I was referencing here on porn addiction are about 10 years old, but if we look at more recent papers, a review that was published just this past February, that's February 2024 for future viewers, found that the data regarding whether or not pornography addiction is real is inconclusive, and largely based in the methodology problems that we've already discussed about the other papers, namely the assumption that viewing porn will always have more negative effects than positive or neutral ones. But again, inconclusive does not mean it's not addictive, just that the data are not there to say for certain one way or the other. As they say in their conclusion, qualitative methods allow researchers to unpack how pornography has become a new cultural reality for young people, one that may indeed be understood as addictive. We therefore advocate for further qualitative researchers with young people in a range of cultural contexts to provide nuanced and culturally specific insights into how they make meaning of their own experiences with pornography, including their perspectives on addiction to pornography. Anyway, just a reminder that the statement that sparked this tangent was that the more we consume unhealthy things, the less desire we will have for healthy things, which isn't necessarily true. But I would just like to point out before we go back to the video that this implies that sex outside of marriage is a healthy thing, as one of the negative impacts of porn use that rises to the level of being problematic is less desire for real sex without differentiation between married and unmarried sex.
So next time someone tells you that porn is a victimless form of entertainment and can even be good for relationships.
Okay, they just go into summary mode here, but the way they phrased that made me think of the ethical considerations regarding the performers in pornography, whether that was their intention or not. So I did just want to discuss that, because the fact of the matter is that legal porn is not always victimless. There is a surprising lack of data with regards to what proportion of performers are doing so under some form of coercion, whether it be the threat of legal action for violating a contract or being pressured by agents and directors to perform, but there are plenty of testimonials about how horrible it can be to work in the industry. Like, seriously, the lack of data here is staggering. The only places that I could find actual numbers for this were Christian anti-porn organizations that tended to equate all sex trafficking with sex trafficking specifically for porn, one legal paper published in 2005 that that cited a documentary movie from the 80s as its source for its claims, with the author of the paper also being the person behind that documentary, so that's a bit dubious. That paper also basically defined porn as sex trafficking, so no matter how enthusiastically all the performers might have been about giving their consent, it's automatically sex trafficking. And then there's also the Polaris Project, which has been found on numerous occasions to have made up data to make things look worse than they are. Like, I'm not saying that there is not an issue with coercion or trafficking in porn, but the data are far too sparse to draw firm conclusions here. But there are two things that I want to mention with regards to this. First is that continuing to stigmatize porn use and act as though every performer is a victim, irrespective of how they view themselves, will not be helpful to the people that actually are victimized. Often the goal of such stigmatization is to wind up passing laws that would outlaw porn. But when sex work is criminalized, it's ultimately bad for the sex workers themselves. They no longer have any legal protection or any form of recourse to ensure that they are fairly compensated. In addition to the legal aspect of it, social stigma also can prevent performers from standing up for themselves and demanding their legal rights be respected, even when they do have legal protections. So, as with so many activities that Christian apologists engage in, making porn sound like something that is unequivocally bad in any and all scenarios actually serves to exacerbate some of the problems with the industry that they claim to care about. Second, how do you as a consumer avoid consuming problematic porn? There is no single answer to that, but one way is to actually pay for it instead of using one of the tube websites. Ideally, paying the performers directly through platforms like OnlyFans, but there are companies dedicated to making ethical porn, where all of their performers are fully informed, can back down at any time, are made to feel safe on set, and are paid fairly. I'll leave a link in the description to an article that lists a few of them, as well as giving a few other tips on how to source ethical porn. Ultimately, though, it's impossible to be 100% certain that any porn is 100% ethical, but that's the nature of literally everything in a capitalist system. It's a nearly sure thing that, with how many electronic devices I use to make my videos, at least one of them, but realistically most of them, were partially made with slave labor. And if you do enough investigation into pretty much any major company, you'll find worker exploitation. Maybe not to the same degree as slavery, but underpaying workers in developing countries, fighting against workers unionizing, trying to save money by compromising on health and safety, and any number of other unethical behaviors. I don't say this to excuse complacency, but rather to highlight that these are systemic issues that need to be addressed at a higher level than the individual consumer. Advocate for performers' rights. Stop stigmatizing porn so that performers who have these sorts of problems won't be dismissed by the system because they're seen as having asked for it just by virtue of their profession. And ideally, pass better regulations protecting performers. Some of the exploitation happens as a result of performers signing contracts without fully comprehending what will be required of them, with threats of legal action being taken against them if they back down. Maybe don't let a written contract count as carte blanche consent to force performers into doing things they don't want for the duration of the contract. Along similar lines, better education. Comprehensive sex education that includes talking about these issues. So that people who choose sex work as a career know what sort of protections they have and are more fully equipped to navigate the situation. And also those who don't choose it don't automatically have a negative opinion of it and are better equipped in making ethical choices regarding their own consumption. That would be a good thing. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Ernie Ray, who says, "Irreducible complexity is not an argument from ignorance. It's an argument against evolution that leaves open the possibility of intelligent design. Neither evolutionism nor creationism have irrefutable evidence to prove themselves right. Therefore, both require faith." Okay, setting aside the they both require faith thing for the moment, irreducible complexity is absolutely an argument from ignorance. At its core, it is essentially, we can't figure out how thing X could have evolved from simpler parts, therefore it must have been created as is. Apologists who use irreducible complexity are constantly on the hunt for biological systems or molecules for which there is no evolutionary explanation. That is, they're looking for places where we are ignorant on the explanation, and then they use this lack of an explanation to say that they are correct. And amusingly, they're usually not even successful at finding things without an explanation. Everything from the flagellar motor to the immune system. As to the irrefutable evidence, you might not like it, but evolution does, in fact, have irrefutable evidence backing it up. The fact that antibiotic resistance is a thing that we have to worry about now is because of evolution. The reason you need a new flu shot every year is because of evolution. The reason COVID-19 didn't exist in the past, but now it does, and will likely require an annual shot just like the flu, is because of evolution. The recent observations of a nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria merging with a species of algae in the first ever observed instance of endosymbiosis is because of evolution. Endosymbiosis is one of the mechanisms of evolution that creationists largely ignore so that they can focus on mutation and complain about how hard large changes would be to bring about purely through point mutations. But in endosymbiosis, two organisms literally merge into one, with them each having their own role in the relationship, leading to a rather massive evolutionary change over very short periods of time. That's how we got our mitochondria. That's how plants got their chloroplasts. You may not accept any of this evidence, but you being ideologically unwilling to accept it does not render it refutable. Though, to be fair, it is refutable in the sense that it's falsifiable. We know what sorts of evidence would prove evolution wrong. And in that sense, I'm actually willing to grant that intelligent design has irrefutable evidence, meaning that its evidence is unfalsifiable. Usually it's because it's so poorly defined that what even counts as evidence can change from moment to moment depending on what sort of argument they're responding to, and that's not a good thing. Science is all about proving shit wrong, and that starts with outlining exactly what it would take to prove a particular shit wrong. And evolution has survived so many scientific discoveries that had the potential to prove it wrong that it's basically as sure a thing as there is possible to be in science.
Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more. But you need to get your Rhino fix in before then. I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. I just realized I can't strip with the microphone on. Don't forget to go to aura.com/ViceRhino to get your 2-week trial for free. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorships manager, and special thanks as always to my patrons, Mandy J, I'm sorry that your call out was on this video, and all the rest, who are the MySpace of the social media sites that make up my channel. If you'd like to be hypersexual, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!
Please don't touch my microphone. Please, no, don't boop the mic. Don't boop the mic. No, don't boop the microphone. Don't do it. Don't do it. Look up here. Look up here. There we go. There we go. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. But now she wants to leave. It's like, why did I come here? I should know better than to approach Daddy when he's wearing the suit. Because he always grabs me and makes me perform. Ooh, that's kind of yucky with the subject of today's video. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah. You're a good girl. You're a good girl. Yes, you are. My bow tie keeps tilting downwards. It's been watching too much porn, so it's lost its ability to stay aroused.